It is the Pastor's Heart and Dominic Steele, and today, now, where and how for Sydney Anglicans, Raj Gupta and Zach Veron are my guests. Today we are starting a discussion, now, where and how for the Anglican Church of Sydney. Last week the Sydney Anglican Synod wrapped up, and in the final session there was an important debate on really where to next, and leader after leader poured out their heart on the issue of we have a problem and what do we do about it. It was the final night of what had been, I think, a frustrating synod. Our guests today are Zach Veron, he leads Bayside Anglican Church, and Raj Gupta, who is the Senior Minister at St Paul's Anglican Church in Carlingford. Zach, Raj, I want to come to your contributions to the debate and your reflections on the debate. But first, you both and I had questions of Archbishop Raffel on where are we now? Questions about attendance, questions about money, questions about the results of the National Church Life Survey. Why, Raj, in vision planning, is it important to do a realistic assessment about where you currently are, understanding the now?
Yeah, thanks, Dominic, and hello, everyone. It's great to be back on the Pastor's Heart. I find that just a fascinating question. A necessary question, but a fascinating question, because it just seems intuitive that to understand the things you need to change, you need to understand where you're currently up to. In life or organisations or churches, we drift on, we develop cultures, we can often exist within a bubble, and so we need a reality check. And in strategic planning of all kinds, this is just a necessary thing. And sometimes, a good friend of mine, he just says, you know, when you look at the facts, when you look at reality, when you look at numbers, sometimes it's depressing. I find that constantly.
I always want it to be better than it is.
We always want it to be better than what it is, but you have to go through that exercise in order to get a reality check so that you can then go through the process and the journey of doing a course correction or tinkering with something or knowing how to pray better, whatever it is. And in my own staff planning process, we've just been through this. I provide a template, and one of the sections there is about a reality check. Where are things currently up to? That's where you have to grapple.
And you try to have a brutally honest conversation.
Well, and it's also encouraging.
Yeah.
You know, it's a two-sided thing, but we're always trying to ask that question: how can we do better?
Zach, you said in the synod, you asked a question.
Yes.
How are we going on attendance? And what's the answer?
So I asked a series of questions to reveal the attendance numbers in the diocese from 2005 to 2022. I actually do that every few synods. That's because we used to publish our attendance numbers in the yearbook. Every year they were there. And then about 15 years ago, they stopped being published. So every few synods I get up and ask the question about attendance. And I do that because Jesus said, the Good Shepherd leaves the 99 sheep in the open field and goes after the one lost sheep until he finds it. And that numbers matter. They matter to Jesus because each number represents a soul with eternity in front of them, a person, a valuable person. And so I think we should count numbers and be cognizant of numbers because they represent what's really important in our ministry, and that's people.
Now, we're going to say a lot of people listen to the Pastor's Heart on audio podcast. We want you to, this episode, to watch the episode because we're going to put some graphs up on the screen, and it'd be actually excellent to watch this episode with your staff team and work out where you are at on these issues. But we'll put the attendance numbers up for the Sydney Diocese for the last 20 years. And Zach, do you want to explain them to us?
So what was revealed in this synod is that from 2005 to 2015, as we see on that graph, numbers in the Diocese of Sydney, average attendance on a Sunday, pretty much plateaued.
The population was going up, but
the population kept going up. And what's interesting is that before 2005, generally, if Sydney grew by 1%, our numbers would grow by about 1%. That happened for many decades. But from 2005 to 2015, we kind of plateaued. There was a small peak there in 2015, and then from 2015 to the pandemic, we declined by 7.5%, a little bit more than 7.5%. Again, Sydney grew in those years, maybe by as much as 10%. So there's a big gap there between our declining numbers and Sydney's population growth. And then what that graph also shows is from the pandemic to 2022, we declined by another 10% and a little bit more. Overall, from 2015 to 2022, our attendance declined by about 18.5%.
Now, I said that figure to one of the state sales managers for a company when we were chatting over morning tea on Sunday at church, and he said, well, if we got that kind of sales figures, we would have been talking about nothing but that and how we fix that. And yet it was kind of the elephant in the room. It just, until you raised the question, nobody was looking at it. You asked some questions about statistics, so Zach. Raj.
Yeah, look, I ask the same question every year. Zach asks every couple of years. And I try to, I just ask this question, not just about attendance, certainly about attendance, but trying to capture something of a, diverse set of numbers. So there's attendance, there's finances, and also there's clergy numbers. And I then go away and look at the Australian population. And as some listeners will be aware, each year I produce a graph. I only have done that in the last day or two, actually, just ahead of appearing here.
So here we go, first time released for 2023.
Only on the pastor's heart, Dominic.
What have you got for us? Yeah.
Well, look, I think it's going to come up on the screen, and here we have it. I do feel in the 2021-2022 stats, I am sympathetic to the view that there is a COVID thing happening there. Now, I want to be careful with that. We don't know the extent of that, but I think every person who's listening would be aware that in 2022 it took some time for people to come back.
I mean, of course there's a COVID thing, and of course, but we still need to work out how to get back.
Well, we still need to do that, and I think, Zach's graph a moment ago, and also the one, if we just put that one back up on the screen, we do see something that is happening in the long term. So I go away and calculate the Australian population. That data is pretty easy to get. This is looking over 20 or so years. The Australian population has increased by 1.4%. I haven't per year. Sorry, annual is really important. I haven't looked at it.
So 20 years, 1.4% per year. That's 25%. Yeah.
It's probably substantially more than that because there's a compounding kind of impact. But you then look at the Sydney Anglican attendance data and you see on average, same period, it has declined by 0.7%.
So the population's gone up 1.4 and our attendance compounded down 0.7.
Yeah, no, look, I don't want to put too much emphasis on the 0.7. I understand there's a bit of a COVID, I know 2023 will, I don't know. I hope.
Back a little.
I hope. But if you look at that graph, you will see, let's put COVID aside. This dissonance between the population growth and Sydney Anglican average adult attendance growth, that has been growing for 20 years. Let's put COVID aside for a moment.
That's right.
And no matter what set of statistics one cares to look at, I think later on we're going to come on to some other ones. This is the pastor's heart. My heart, I'm concerned.
Yeah. And I'm concerned, and yet it did feel like our leaders weren't.
Well, it perhaps some, but it was a great moment at the Synod.
It was a great debate, and I'm thankful to you, Zach. You kind of put it in there. I didn't know the questions you were going to ask at Synod, and you didn't know the questions I was going to ask at Synod.
I didn't know what motion I was going to move until the answers.
And I just thought, it was an hour and a half or so. It was an excellent debate,
it was.
Just really getting into these issues, and I just want to be thankful for everyone who contributed to that in some way.
So the questions I asked were about the National Church Life Survey, and in 2014, the diocese, we set ourselves a mission to achieve by 2020 on a series of goals. And the questions I asked were to say, well, how have we gone against the different goals, against the different targets? And really, I think in our parish analysis, what we do is we set ourselves some targets, some goals, some hope for outcomes of the number of people who might become Christian or the results we might get in the National Church Life Survey. And then after 12 months we say, well, how do we go? That's what you do?
Yeah. Well, if it's measured, it's more likely to be done. If it's measured, you're more likely to consider it to be important.
Now, we'll put the first one up here. And the first goal, reach the lost with the life-giving message of Jesus Christ. And the measures, and I actually think the third one is the most important one, the newcomers one. And the goal was to increase newcomers in church across the place from 9% back in 2011 to 12%. And, I mean, I remember it used to be 12%, then it went to 9%, and that was sad. And instead of going back up to 12 like we hoped, it's gone down to 5.4, and that is a crushing number, Raj.
It's alarming. It should be alarming for every single one of us. Because when you think about how a church, let me call it a church system works, you expect, what we can call outflows in the NCLS language, and there's going to be people there who go to glory, who move, etc., etc., etc. But ultimately you have to look at the inflows. And this newcomer statistic, what that means is a technical term. It means someone who is coming to our church now who 5 years ago was not going to any church. That's not transfers in or something like that, just looking at, the global picture. How many people are now in any church who were not in a church 5 years ago? It's a crucial number. And that it's now 5.4%. We should have a week of fasting and prayer.
Yeah.
Well, it's a crucial number for your church, my church, your church, all churches, but it also has a ramification for the whole diocese.
Yeah.
So if we're not having as many newcomers stay as we used to have, and our numbers are dropping, what does that mean for the number of people that are studying at Moore College? And how many ministers are we going to be training for the next generation? It'll have a flow-on effect for it. What does it mean for our structures of our diocese? So all these numbers have implications for the present and for the future.
I just want to say, if you're watching us in a staff team at the moment, it would be really good. I mean, if you're in Australia, if you're part of the National Church Life Survey, it'd be great to go and work out what are the numbers for your place on that. And if it's higher than 5.4%, well, praise God, and aim to get it higher. And if it's lower than 5.4%, then do that week of fasting.
Yeah.
Other numbers here. We'll look at the second one. It's to increase that our members report that they've invited someone to church in the last 12 months from 40% to 45%. That was the goal. It actually went down to 32. Now, I've got a little bit of sympathy. That one is actually, that's a lead indicator. It's a super important statistic, although that's the one that's particularly likely to be hit by COVID because the numbers were done at the end of 2021.
Yeah, I think, look, with all of the 2021, NCLS data, one needs to be careful. I think what I'm more interested in is the long-term trends.
And the long-term trends are clear, though.
It is. It's very clear. And this is where it really helps us. Your opening question to me, Dominic, about just reality check and planning and things like that. I was coming in here and I was thinking, how do I help people understand this? And for me, life comes back to cricket. I have a son who's a leg spin bowler. He's a champion. Anyway, we'll see how he goes. But he's a leg spin bowler, and part of that is about the technicality of how to do what you do. But the other part of it is, and when you get into the high levels of coaching, they talk to you about what you do and your strategy and your tactics. And when you bowl in a certain spot and what you're trying to do, that's the kind of strategy discussion, the tactics discussion that we need to become a little bit better at embracing and having. And that's just some of those statistics. When you look at the long-term trends, they open up these questions. My church, we were having this discussion, that kind of statistic was in mind. How can we help people grow in their confidence to engage people in conversations, the evangelism piece? And some would say, and for years I was like this, I would say, look, just get out there and do it, the Nike kind of answer, as it's sometimes said. But I went to my new church and, people kept saying to me, mission heat's low, Raj. I talked around and thought, yeah, you're right, mission heat's low. We then got into this statistic. We thought, okay, how can we do better? This is the bowler. Where do you bowl? What's the strategy and the tactic you use? And so we invited someone to come along. We had a few Monday evenings where they came along specifically to help people do better in evangelism. And hundreds of people came. I thought, hang on, this is really interesting. So many people here at this church, it's a great church, have a heart for evangelism, but there's a gap. Researching it, talking about it, having permission to engage in it, people had a gap then of knowing what to do and how to go about it. That's the gap where we needed to help people with, and as a result, we're seeing more invitations. When we ask people, tell us who to pray for, who you're trying to engage with. We had hundreds of names, and that's what we have. There's the combination of the reality check and the combination with the strategy and the tactics about how to help people do better. So it's a critical discussion. For me, long-term trends in this area are always better than short-term trends. It is so easy to argue away particular statistics, but you look at the long-term trends. We've had this conversation before on the Pastor's Heart, Dominic, actually. It wasn't that long ago where we just talked about the need to engage in these matters and to be okay confronting the brutal reality or the encouraging reality as a means to trying to do better. Yeah. I find it interesting. Someone said to me, now a lot of people studying at college and lots of other people, they use this tool called OPQ, the Occupational Personality Questionnaire, which helps us understand our personal preferences and so on. Anyway, I was talking to someone with my, CMD hat on, Centre for Ministry Development in my college, and they just made the observation, when you aggregate these results that are coming out of the OPQ, that is our preferences and how we work and how we think, as a generalisation, people in ministry are not great implementers, but great reflectors. And you put it all together, and there's other things as well, and we're very good at consoling ourselves when we don't implement well. And one of the things maybe we need to do a little bit better in is learning what we can about the implementation piece, and the reality check is a crucial part of that implementation piece.
Let's look at the next slide and the deepened spiritual maturity among our members slide. And again, I'll go to the second one here, and praise God there, the second goal of increasing our members reporting time spent in prayer, Bible reading and meditation. One of the lines is, if you can get that up, that people are reading the Bible 4 days a week, high correlation to spiritual growth, and we went up there. And so not quite as high as targeted, but we went from 43 to 46.7, and so praise God for that. However, on the issue of, and there's a really crucial correlation here between members reporting much growth in faith, and the goal was to get that to go from 47 to 60, and we ended up with 38%. And I mean, if we're striving for disciples to be more mature, that's a hard number, 38.
Yeah.
And again, long term. Yeah.
We've got to remember there are some really good indicators and great ministry happening and positive signs, but when it comes back to the statistics, and your question about what was happening in that debate, I felt that perhaps some of the opposition was too focused on the COVID years and are expecting things to bounce back very quickly. But the reality is that we have a large number of people within the ranks of Sydney Anglicans that are the baby boomer generation. I'm a 1962 baby and one of the last baby boomers, and that generation is moving through our ranks, going to glory very, very quickly, and it doesn't appear that there's as many other babies.
Those numbers are going down, but also they're getting older.
Yes. So 2023 numbers may be a little bit better than 2022. We won't know until next year, but I'm not sure if there's a little blip that will be maintained because of the march to glory, as I've called it. And actually, we don't know how many babies we've got because we don't count them. We used to count infant baptism numbers. That stopped, I think 12 years ago. Somebody decided they're not important to count.
Now, Raj, I skipped over an issue that you raised, and you said to me that the other day on the phone, there's a softening in giving. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. Look, I haven't prepared a graph on this. Although it's kind of captured in one of the graphs we had earlier, when you look at offertories, you see, obviously, in the COVID years, there was a slight decline in offertories. Now, that was more than offset by JobKeeper and so on and so on. But the last few years, if you look at real giving, there's been a decline. So gross giving's gone up slightly still, but real giving, that is adjusted for inflation, that is to me just another concerning number. Yeah, that seems to me it's gone back. I want to do some more analysis on this should I get the time to, and I may not, but just a raw looking at the table of giving over a long period of time has just...
So about when did that peak? Giving peak?
Oh, look, I haven't done that analysis, to be fair, Zach, so I don't want to... I just want to be careful with that.
Right.
In raw terms, giving is still higher this year or last year than it was the year before, but I haven't adjusted it for inflation. Now, I think for, the years until, let's say, 2015 broadly, my expectation would be, because we have done better in electronic giving, which means people are more regular and disciplined and so on and so on, that has acted as a factor to see giving increase, and that over COVID, right? You would expect that. The church I was at the time, we had all kinds of people who hadn't previously
been on
said...
electronic giving, but now were...
Well, I remember it was the very people sometimes who said, electronic, I will never do that. Over COVID, they worked out how to work things online. So, great blessing, but, you can only switch people once, to that. So it's no surprise to me, 2022, it just... so early, that's something I want to watch, because it's not quite that clear yet. But all of these different factors, Dominic, no matter how you look at it, my concern is they all are pointing in similar directions of concern. Zach makes the point as well, just about the ageing, population within Sydney Anglican circles, and I just don't think Sydney Anglican circles, but church-wide.
And I think, despite the opposition of the front bench, there was a groundswell of concern about this issue. It felt like you won the hearts of the Synod.
I thought so. I thought it felt really good to be with my brothers and sisters and to hear their passion and the applause that was happening from some really great speeches from many people. Yeah.
So now we've done that, where to? Zach?
Well, that's the question. So we look at numbers and we say, okay, what do they mean and what do we do next? Having thought about it a lot since the Synod, I think 4 things that I'd want us to concentrate on. Number 1 is prayer. That is, pray to the Lord of the harvest that the Lord might turn people's hearts from darkness to light, from Satan to God, so that they might join the ranks of those sanctified through faith in Jesus Christ. Jesus will build his church, and so we need to pray to him. Secondly, keep the priority of evangelism going in our diocese. We've had this priority for many, many decades. We must not lose that. That is what we need to keep doing, sharing salvation through Jesus Christ alone. And that's our message, the risen Lord Jesus. So we've got to concentrate on evangelism. Thirdly, personally, I would like us to put a disproportionate amount of effort and energy into children's and youth ministry. We're doing lots and lots of ministries. There's a lot of effort going, perhaps shotgun approach being scattered. We are doing children's and youth ministry, but I would like us to see a lot more, a disproportionate amount of effort. The statistics tell us that 79% of people come to faith in Christ before their 20th birthday, and 84% of us came to Christ before our 30th birthday. That is, nearly everybody in our churches became a Christian as a young person. It's part of the way that the Lord has shaped us. You're more open to change, you're more open to accepting that Jesus is Lord. It appears when you're a young person compared to when you're much older. There are many people who get converted on their deathbeds, but that's not as prolific as young people come to faith. So this is a long-term strategy because young people, babies, children, don't take leadership in the church for a decade or two. But we need to put a disproportionate amount of effort into children's and youth ministry. And fourthly, I think we need to start with a blank sheet. So ministry in Sydney, Anglican ministry in Sydney began in 1788. From small beginnings, it grew and we shifted, we changed as Sydney grew and shifted and changed, and we come forward 200 and almost 40, 50 years, and we're at this certain point of time, and I don't believe that we're shifting and changing enough with the change that is happening now and will happen in the future. And what I mean by a blank sheet is we ask the question, okay, the statistics say last year there were 39,600 Anglicans at church on a Sunday, on an average Sunday. If the Lord just dropped us into the Greater Sydney area, the geographical boundaries of the diocese of Sydney, the Blue Mountains, the Illawarra, all the way down to Ulladulla, and gave us our buildings and said, you can do whatever you want to do, whatever you think is important to reach people for Christ in this geographical area, what would we do? What structures would we devise? What ministries would we concentrate on? What ministries would we choose not to do? Because you can't do everything. What would be our priorities? What would we do with our buildings? We've got about 275 parishes. Is that what we need? Or should we have 500 parishes? Perhaps we need 50 parishes. What do we do with the duplication of effort that many of our colleagues are burdened with, the increased compliance, the issues that are grappling us? What do we do with the grey clouds appearing in the horizon, with government perhaps interfering with what we can and can't say in our ministries? If we start with a blank sheet, and this is not easy to do, but if we had 39,600 of us agreeing on a course of action, agreeing on our priorities, I believe that the Lord would bless those endeavours and lead us to a more effective place for the current situation and also well into the future.
What do you think, Rush?
Oh, look, all of that, there's a lot of merit in those four things. Thank you, Zach. I hadn't thought of it like that. I haven't necessarily engaged in
it's
a
hard to
Christian
disagree
in
with
this
prayer.
way.
It's hard to disagree with evangelism.
Well, look, I don't want to. Prayer and evangelism at the core. I think I would even add to that. We saw a Christian maturity statistic that was concerning a little while ago, and my conviction is in the Bible. Just the Christian maturity is foundational, and modern ministry models are built up around that, and we see the statistics that as someone grows in maturity, other things flow. I think what strikes me in this area is, and I'm thinking back to the discussion at Synod, and I'm now combining it with my own experience of being a church consultant, I guess, with the Centre for Ministry Development. Most of the time, I find when I ask people, and I'm coaching people, and I say to them, how can I be of help to you today? The number one answer I get is, can you help me think about my church strategy? It's fascinating. Not once or twice, it's not an aberration, it's the most common. This is the area that most people struggle with. Strategic thinking, and then going into the implementation space. And so I think the aspirational blank sheet is one element of that. In established churches, we need then to bring change management and implementation into it. Now, all of this it's very complex and difficult. And I just think, there was a strand of discussion. We just need to get out there and do it. And I just come back to be it a leg spin bowler or another bowler, we have the baseline of what we know we need to do, which is growing in maturity, growing to be more like the Lord Jesus, and part of that is evangelism. I think we've separated those two a bit too much. But we then need to help people know how to implement strategies to that end. So a diocesan strategy for every church might just be to have a strategic plan.
Each individual church. Yeah. It's not about the centre telling the church what to do, and there was a misunderstanding.
You copped some flack on that in the debate, and I think some people were saying you were arguing for some sort of top-down thing, which bottom up. That is not the way you were thinking at all. But you're thinking, how do we do it differently?
I'm on the Growth Corporation board, and I'm sure it's okay for me to say, one of the things the Growth Corporation really insists on with churches is to have a look at the strategic plan. Yes. And our number one observation is most plans are just too high level and haven't been worked through in much detail. What does the implementation look like? It comes back to our OPQ profiles. And if we could... A diocesan strategy could be for each individual church to have a plan and to help churches know how to do that. Yeah. That would be a brilliant diocesan plan, which would incorporate many of the things Zach's just been talking about, and some others as well. So,
I mean, it's strange. Yeah. You look at those things from 2014, and what are those things? What was that plan then? It was get your newcomers up, get your maturity up, and I think, well, that's a good idea.
That's a starting point, Dominic. When on my staff retreat recently, just a few weeks back, week before Synod, everyone had to work out those goals, but then go from there to what does that look like? And there was a bit of a template we developed for people to do that. Part of that is the reality check that people need. Part of that is focusing priorities. Part of that is having a sustainable set of priorities. If you have 10 priorities, you're not going to do any of them. You need 3 or 4. So we pushing into this implementation space, which we should know, I think we do know, is something that many of us struggle with. That the strategic planning process at a micro level, ground up, I think would be a brilliant thing to work out how to help churches to do.
It would be a great step. Each individual church with their own strategic ministry plan. Yet we are a fellowship of churches, and so there's other questions that we need to work out together that hold us in fellowship with each other. Do we need 2 theological colleges that lead to ordination? There's Moore College and Youth Works College. There's a little bit of duplication in effort there. Is that the way it should go into the future? What do we do with our ageing buildings? Are we going to help each other? There are some answers, but are we doing enough quickly enough? What do we do with the increasing trend of our people, Sydney Anglican people, moving to larger churches, wanting the larger church experience? And how are we going to do that in fellowship with each other? This has been a trend that's been going for about 20 years, but has accelerated since COVID. So each individual church coming up with their...
So can I just say, I agree with that, Zach. Yep. I'm director of a larger church, and I totally agree with that. We have seen lots and lots of people come to Carlingford in the last year or two. Many of them are leaving smaller churches to come to a large church for a whole variety of reasons. I'm not against those reasons necessarily, but here is one example of a reality. This is your point.
That's it.
That we need to grapple with together.
That's it. In fellowship. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming to talk to us. Thanks very much for having this discussion, which we needed to have, and I'm so glad you raised it.
The discussion we need to have.
You've been with us on The Pastor's Heart. My guest, Zach Veron. He leads Bayside Anglican Church, and Raj Gupta, the Senior Minister of St Paul's Church in Carlingford. My name's Dominic Steele. We will look forward to your company next Tuesday afternoon on The Pastor's Heart.